I still remember the day that I was praying, hoping to go back to Jehovah's Witnesses because I was still thinking that I was a bad person for being disfellowshipped. I was convinced that the world was corrupt, and without JW literature and not being back at a meeting for a long time, I decided to read their Bible by itself and to take in God's Word every day till I was ready to come back, till I could feel something. The opposite happened. I accidentally came across a few scriptures that disproved a couple of their core beliefs.
Hello, brothers and sisters. It's good to see you again. How are you doing? I hope you're doing great. I have some exciting news today. Based off the last two vlogs I've shot, one was about the massive amount of questions that I had that I'd asked other preachers and other Christian-based churches that I went to, and they were logical questions that they couldn't answer. A lot of people were like, hey, do you have a further list of these questions? I got a lot of messages about that, so I piled them together. There's a lot. I handpicked a few of my favorites, and we're going to go over a few of those today, some more logical questions that I haven't been able to find any Christian person from any Christian church to logically explain. They have explanations for them, but they have no explanations for why they're in the Bible, why do they contradict each other, and why no one's addressed it so far. No one answers those questions. So I've had some answers. Well, God may have felt this way at this time, or we have to consider the context, or you're taking it out of context. Well, I always ask, well, what is the context? And I never hear anything back, or the answers that I get back just aren't logical enough or explain why those things are in there in the first place. So let's go over a handful of these. I've got my notes on my phone. So if you haven't seen the last vlog, I'll pick the three from there. How long does God's anger last towards someone? Well, apparently Micah 7:18 and Jeremiah 17:4 states that both forever and not forever are the case. Does God tempt people? Well, growing up as a Jehovah's Witness in the Jehovah's Witness cult, I was always taught that God does not tempt people. However, Abraham was tempted by God in Genesis 22 verses 1, but James chapter 1 verses 13 says God can't tempt any man. And then we also have to think about, Adam and Eve with the one tree of knowledge. That is a temptation in itself. Can you see God's face and live? This was a big one that I asked the JWs when I actually went to one of their carts in a mall and asked them some questions. Genesis 32:30 says yes, Jacob saw God face to face, and so did Abraham in Genesis 12 verses 7, Moses as well in Exodus 33:11, and we can't forget the 70 elders of Israel in Exodus 24 verses 9 through 11. I don't think that scripture was mentioned in the last one, but in Exodus 33:20 it says no, and John 1:18 says no man has seen God's face or at any time or ever will. But none of them really did, because 1 Timothy 6:16 says no man can see or has seen God. Were humans created before the animals? According to Genesis chapter 2, verses 18 through 9, and Genesis chapter 1, verses 25 through 7, the answer is yes and no. Will the earth last forever? Well, 2 Peter 3:10 says no, but Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 4 says yes. Is Jesus the only man who ascended into heaven? 2 Kings 2:11, John 3:13 says yes and no. This is a really good one. In the Old Testament law, were children to be punished for the sins of their fathers? Deuteronomy chapter 24 verses 16 says no, but Deuteronomy chapter 5 verses 9 says yes. Does God ever become tired or need rest? This was interesting, thinking about the creation of the earth. God's all-powerful and never, he's an unlimitless bound thing of dynamic energy. Well, I was taught as a Jehovah's Witness, no, but Isaiah chapter 40 verses 28 says no, confirms that. But Genesis chapter 2 verses 2 says yes. Isaiah chapter 43:24 also says yes. This one is really interesting, just getting into numbers. How many men drew the sword for Israel as counted by Joab? According to 2 Sam 24:9, 800,000. But in 1 Chronicles 21:5, which is talking about the same account, 1.1 million. How much did David pay for the threshing floor? According to 1 Chronicles chapter 21 verses 25, 600 shekels of gold. But according to 2 Samuel 24:24, it was 50 shekels of silver. Chief of King David's warriors killed 800 men in the encounter with a single spear. According to 2 Sam 23 verses 8, that was 800 men. But 1 Chronicle 11:11, which talks about the same account, it was 300 men. So how many blind men did Jesus heal near Jericho? According to Mark chapter 10 verses 46 and Luke chapter 18 verses 35, there's one man. But Matthew 20:30, there was two men. How many people saw Jesus resurrected? 3 women and 2 guards, according to Matthew 28, verses 1 through 5. 3 women and no guards, according to Mark chapter 16, verses 5. And 4 women, 2 spare guards, and Peter in Luke chapter 24, verses 4. But John 20, verses 12 says only Mary, and then she ran back to alert Peter and a nameless apostle. Should homosexuals be killed or exiled? According to 1 Kings 15, 11 through 12, exiled. And according to Leviticus chapter 20, verses 13, they should be killed. When the women arrived at Jesus' tomb, was it open or closed? According to Matthew chapter 28, verses 2, it was closed. And according to Luke chapter 24, verses 2, it was open. So I think you kind of get the idea of where I'm going here. There's some really, really, really good things in here, the stuff to talk about morals. If you guys want a part 2 to this video, this was just a handful of really quick scriptures on why I can't believe in the Bible anymore until these questions are answered. I'm open to believing that there's a God in Christianity, but until this gigantic list of probably, I don't know how many I have in here. And hopefully I'm trying to get this available as a PDF download that I've created that you guys can share and use this as logical questions to start asking people who are in Christianity or Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons, because this stuff does not make sense. And it makes sense that cults are born from a book that is inaccurate, apparently very immoral, and all over the place. And you would think by now, centuries later, that they would have had someone to address these questions and to make sense of them. For me to try to be open-minded, it kind of makes sense that, there would be some translation errors, from ancient Greek and Hebrew to English, which ancient Greek and Hebrew, if you go back to the Septuagint, so that there's only so far that we can go as far as translating, but you think they would have been addressed by now by major religions and trying to get a truthful doctrine out there, or at least admitting, hey, at church, this book has problems, but we're still studying it and learning it along. You think they would have some kind of disclaimer like that, but most churches do not. Now, in one bonus one, I always get a kick out of this one. Does the Bible say to sell your riches and give to the poor? Luke 18:22, 12:33, and 14:33 says yes. But also, you can also keep the riches for yourself, just like the first century churches did in Acts chapter 2, verses 44 through 5, and Acts chapter 4, 34 through 37.
After secretly meeting with a fellow friend whom had doubts about some of the teachings the Jehovah's Witnesses had, he sent me a YouTube video that changed my life. It was Ray Franz who disproved the blood belief. And after that, I started noticing the Bible itself was full of contradictions. It was my worst nightmare. I eventually went to other Christian churches and asked them the same questions that my Bible studies used to ask me. My questions kept coming, and no one could or would answer them. They have followed a similar pattern. Apologize, talk about how their religion made them feel, talk about the things they couldn't explain, or they would try to answer the questions but wouldn't logically answer why the contradictions were there in the first place, or the context. Even if they told me I was taking things out of context, they never got back to me. And then they'd straight up ghost me or invite me to some religious party hoping I'd forget. Until these questions are answered logically, it is extremely clear that the Bible is fallible, inconsistent, immoral, and dangerous to be shaping my and my future children's opinions around. So, I chose freedom. I chose the freedom to explore all religions. What if Buddhists have it right? What if minimalists have it right? What if some religion, lifestyle, or book has more to add to my life? Even though it was extremely painful to realize that I had been lied to my entire life by the Jehovah's Witnesses, and now to find out the entire Bible itself is nothing but contradictions and inaccuracies, I needed to go through this pain to experience growth as a person. Eventually, I was able to let go of the ignorance and hate other Christian churches would continually teach, and I chose freedom to be myself and explore all religions, life, and to chase my dreams. Something I wasn't able to do before.